Kia ora everyone, hello, my name is Anthony Mitchell. I'm a senior education consultant at Schoolbox. A little bit later you'll also meet one of my fellow Schoolboxes, Dan Borbley, who is also an education consultant at Schoolbox, who will be a member of the panel for this session. So we're going to be talking all about analytics around building a whole student picture. And so this session is going to consist of a very brief intro from myself around some of the data that is available within Schoolbox for you to use towards analytics. And then I'm going to be calling up two teachers and educators from within our Schoolbox schools who are going to help me provide a bit more insight into how they're using analytics within their schools, and Dan's going to provide a really great education perspective from the Schoolbox side. So I'm really excited about this. We're going to run a Q&A panel up here with some pre-written questions, but also hopefully we might get a chance to throw to some audience questions, potentially, depending on how brave we're feeling at the time. So without further ado, let's get going. So our objectives today are based on really getting a better understanding of the value that analytics brings to teaching and learning. Now, some of you will be far down this road. Some of you will already be integrating products into your Schoolbox instances or outside your Schoolbox instances, so potentially you're one of our IntelliSchool customers who we greatly value our Premier partnership with, but you might be using your data elsewhere to analyze students, or you may be beginning this journey. You may be at the very start of this process, really trying to wrap your head around, this kind of giant thing that is analytics and where you're going to start with that. So hopefully you can gain a better understanding no matter where you are in your journey. I think we want to learn how people are leveraging that data, the ways in which they're weaving it into their teaching and learning practice, how it's informing pedagogy, how it's making the school a better place for learners to be and to improve their outcomes, and also how it's helping teachers improve their practice. And we're going to look at how Schoolbox can support that in terms of the features that we're offering, which is actually where we're going to start. So we're going to do a quick glance at Schoolbox data. It's not going to be in depth. If you want to know more about extracting data from Schoolbox, we've got the Strategy Studio, which is being manned at break times, which you're welcome to come and have a conversation with a consultant or a school engagement manager about. But this is really just giving you a little bit of a picture into what you might be able to pull out. So obviously, we have 3 levels of markbooks within Schoolbox. We have the class markbook and the course markbook. They both behave, as of this next release, very similarly to one another, with a few bits and pieces that are slightly different on each markbook. But those give you a view of the individual classes and the cohorts taking certain courses from a markbook perspective. A markbook that's maybe a little less talked about, depending on which state or territory or country you're from, is the rubric markbook. And so the rubric markbook also contains really valuable information about those capabilities and indicators that you're assessing against and the outcomes that students are achieving within those per assessment, but also overall, especially if you're trying to make final judgments on capabilities, how students have performed against those in terms of their entire coursework. That rubric markbook is really powerful. And there is CSV exports from each of those markbooks, but we'll also talk about other ways to bring that data out as well. We have curriculum usage within Schoolbox. So I've talked about this in previous sessions, but we've got the ability to obviously map curriculum. We have installable curriculum packages. So these days it's pretty hard to find a state curriculum or a sort of a common international curriculum that isn't available as an installable package. If we don't have yours, I apologize and come talk to someone and, let's figure out if that's something that we can do. But we also have the ability to build bespoke curriculum. So obviously as individual schools, you'll have things like approaches to learning, potentially, special character curriculums that you're trying to instill, digital literacy skills, whatever it might be. These can all be turned into coded curriculum for you to map against the learning management system. We also recently introduced a coverage report, and that is the ability to look at that curriculum against particular courses of work within the platform and identify gaps in coverage, to identify over-teaching or under-teaching of curriculum, and also see the types of activities or LMS features that curriculum has been mapped against. Are you using it for badges? Are you using it with rubrics? Are you using it as part of due work submission workflows? So there are many ways to pull data out of that. And there's also, again, the ability to bring that data out in a CSV if you want to manipulate that inside a spreadsheet elsewhere. Pastoral care, so, we've kind of looked on one side at the academic data, but there's also really, really, really powerful pastoral care data within Schoolbox if you are using our pastoral care module. I'm not being biased, but I do think pastoral care is one of our strongest features in terms of the value that it brings to a school. Pastoral care is incredibly important, whether that's, your concept of well-being, safeguarding, whatever you might call it. I think everyone in the room that works with children will agree that pastoral care is of the utmost importance, and we take it very seriously too. So we continue to make improvements to that space, release upon release. In fact, you'll see some improvements this afternoon in 25.1, tomorrow afternoon, sorry, in 25.1, so keep an eye out for that. If you aren't aware, we have a set of publicly available APIs at api.schoolbox.com.au, which you can go to and access all of the different endpoints that we've documented. Those range from assessment, to creating pastoral entries, updating users, modifying groups, all sorts of different endpoints, calendar. So that data can be pulled out of Schoolbox and potentially pushed in as well. So if you are building integrations within your platforms, those could be of use to you as well if you are creating bespoke solutions within your school. Of course, if that's not something you want to build, instead it's a feature that you want to see us sort of produce ourselves and have accessible by our customers. The help forums have request threads in there as well, in which case you can make feature requests and throw your support behind other requests people have made that you want to see come to fruition. So that's just a little, like I said, a little highlight of data. I'm now going to call up the panelists to the stage. So I'm first going to call up Trinity Hastie. So Trinity is the head of research and professional practice at Kincoppal Rose Bay School in Sydney. Shout out to Sydney. And a PhD candidate at the University of Sydney. I've also got here with me Ben Davey, who is an assistant principal at Bacchus Marsh Grammar, and his focus is on data across the school. I'm also going to call up my fellow Schoolboxer, Dan Borbley, who is an education consultant in Schoolbox, so I'm very lucky to work alongside, and has 2 decades worth of experience in schools where he's worked in key pastoral roles. And just a big shout out to Dan. He's also a drama teacher like I am, which we all know is a great benefit within schools. He's handed out the mic, so I'm going to grab one too, and we're going to get going with this. Testing, testing. All right, let me pull my notes out. Sorry, everyone. My notes decided to close themselves. It wouldn't be a tech conference without a technical issue. Oh, look at Ben. He's prepared. Look at that. Let's all give a round of applause to Ben. Yeah, thank you.
Does mean I don't have mine.
Yeah, that's all right. You'll be okay. I want to thank you all, first and foremost, for being a part of this panel. I think it's really important that we hear from our schools about their practice. So I'm going to throw to Ben and Trinity one at a time first, and we're going to get a bit of a Cliff Notes version of their journey. As anyone that's done data analytics within their school, you know it's not an overnight project. So maybe starting with Ben and then going to Trinity, would you maybe just give us a bit of that Cliff Notes version of that journey towards achieving analytics within your school?
Well, I mean, as you say, it's a long journey, so I'll try to get to the point without my script. So about 15 years ago, we embarked on a massive project, spent a lot of money, a lot of resources, an enormous amount of time pre-Power BI, to give you some context, creating these amazing dashboards, and they were, at the time, whiz-bang, cutting-edge data analytics and some really, really good reports, which to this day I think were absolutely fantastic. Only problem was no one used them. They were a little bit clunky. There were a couple of little niggles with it, and for a whole range of reasons we didn't really carve out the time, and they were a little bit too complex for some of our staff. Fast forward to more recently, we've had a number of changes in staffing and a number of changes in roles, and we've recently adopted IntelliSchools. And I think we're now at a stage where we are completely rethinking how we're going to go ahead with data from this point. And having a tool like IntelliSchools, I'm not sponsored, really, really helps in terms of that usability and getting the data at the level that the teachers need it to the teachers in the way that they need it has been absolutely key to the strategies that we're going to be implementing. So we've learned a lot over that time, and if anyone wants more details, I'm more than happy to discuss it. But the gist of it is that we're now at this very exciting time to sort of relaunch our whole data thing with all the things we've learned over the last 10, 15 years of lots and lots of mistakes.
Thanks for that, Ben. I'm going to hand you back your notes because I found my questions. You did great without them. Trinity.
I'm at King Coppell Rose Bay School, and just prior to 2019 when I started at the school, there was a project which was around kind of modernising our whole digital ecosystem, which was called Project Shallot, because we were moving from like an onion to a shallot, and we were like slimming everything down. So it happened in the shell office, and it was a whole thing. But as a part of that, there was this real deliberate design to try and centralise our data, I guess, and make it accessible to users across the school, so that people had access, to the right data at the right time. As part of that, we started using Schoolbox. And at that point, we really had this thought, well, we would like to build a student profile, that surfaces all the data for the students. We believe very much that core to who we are as a school is that we have this deep knowledge of our students, and we think that we can leverage technology to really help us do that. At that point, we thought we were going to build something bespoke, and we went quite a long way down the path of thinking about designing something, that had everything we wanted it in exactly the way that we needed it. And then we sort of found out fairly late in the piece that actually that was going to be something that as a sort of a smallish size school was going to be really, really difficult for us to actually maintain and use. Fortunately, at that point, IntelliSchool became possible for us.
Again, not sponsored.
Again, not sponsored, just serendipitous. And so we were an early adopter of IntelliSchool. And look, this is where I will say that was a challenging experience as a school that was sort of one of the first that was really trying to understand how to use it alongside Schoolbox and, with our SIS, which is synergetic. So it did take us a while to get started, and I think I understand that experience is much, much better now, but it was, there was a long lead time, probably of about 9 months, where we were actually trying to get everything working. And then once they did work, kind of similar to what you said, there was this moment where I was like, ta-da, it's working, big reveal, and of course most people were sort of nonplussed and thought, oh well, that's just, another thing that leadership are expecting us to do, and weren't very excited. So since then it's been a journey of really finding ways to integrate the analytics and make them usable and valuable to the teachers, I guess.
Yeah, great. Thank you. That's great insight into that journey from both of you. I guess before we sort of jump into digging into some more of that, I think, there's probably, and this isn't me trying to offend anyone, but some data nerds in the room, I would assume. I'm one of them, so I'm calling myself that. So I guess a little bit of insight into what makes you passionate about analytics. What is, I know both of you are heavily involved in it. Maybe passion's the wrong word, maybe it's a calling, I don't know what you want to call it, but what sort of brings you towards analytics and keeps you in that sort of space?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. But I think for me, someone much wiser than me once described educational data as like trying to nail jelly to a wall. There's so many variables, and it's so complex. Trying to capture useful data about our students is a real challenge. But at the end of the day, most teachers spend most of their time being the only adult in the room, working in a level of isolation. And we all just want to know if we're doing a good job. And really, that's the core of what we're trying to do. And what that good job looks like is obviously open for interpretation. But, you know, for me, this is the very core of what we do. How do we know that intervention worked? How do we know that what we're doing is making a positive impact on our young people if we don't collect some sort of data and do some sort of analysis of it? But getting that right is the it's the magic bullet, really. So.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's there's like the personal level on which you feel an attraction to data for whatever reason, and then there's, I guess, the dream, right, of the utopian institutional possibilities. But I guess similarly, like I'm by background I'm an English teacher, so I'm definitely not a natural fit for someone who does data dashboards. But yes, I agree. I think for me it also started with the fact that as a subject teacher in a secondary school, you often have those questions about, well, why is this child that I'm perceiving in this way in my classroom clearly so different and presenting so differently in other classrooms, and the frustration that sometimes it wouldn't be until the end of a semester when you were looking at somebody's reporting that you'd actually get this window into the fact that actually you were just missing a piece of the puzzle that your colleagues had managed to find. And I think so there is really that sense in which we do get out of bed in the morning as educators because we want to meet the needs of every individual student. And I think data can provide us with reassurance that we're doing that, or alert us to those opportunities for intervention. And I think that's something that is just alluring about data dashboards. I would say as well, though, I'm definitely someone who is really interested in the way schools can empower teachers and create that kind of informed professional judgment. I think so often our experience of teaching is that we are infantilised, or that we become, kind of puppets within this kind of institutional regime. And I think a really healthy data culture in schools can be a way that people feel really informed and really connected to what's going on around the school. And it's a way that you can have these fantastic professional reflective conversations, at a whole, at different levels of the school, so that we get a sense that we are building collective efficacy and we are all going in the same direction. And we know that what we're doing is having the impact that we need it to have for the students.
Wow. Thank you both for those answers. I feel inspired, so I'm going to... anyway, that's two beautiful answers. Thank you. So I guess we'll go to a couple of questions, maybe directed at certain people. And if anyone wants to jump in at any point, it's not a no-go. So please do jump in if you've got something you want to add. So I'm going to start with you, Ben. I guess, like I said, there are schools in this room that are really starting that journey now. They haven't gone too far down that track yet. That's, there's maybe more informal analysis happening, but they might be going on a much more sort of serious journey on it. So where do you think schools really should start when getting serious about weaving data analytics into their ways of working? And, does there need to be a mandate given to someone to pursue it within the school, put a person in place that's going to lead that charge, or have space carved out for them? Or where does that leadership kind of come into this journey?
Well, I mean, leadership is key, but I think there's really always three pieces to the puzzle, and the biggest part is staff buy-in. Teachers are time poor. Whatever happens in terms of contact time and face-to-face time, a dedicated teacher is always going to be very, very busy, because if they do have extra time, they're going to use that time to do their job better. So if you're going to expect them to look at data and take that time, there has to be a really obvious and clear reason. So examples of this might be, is it something that's actually saving them time? Is the data saving them time? So for example, we've got a pulse alert we're trying out, which tells tutor group teachers when a student's been away for 3 days. So they don't have to remember that this student's been away for 3 days, and they know they've then got to contact their parents and see how the kid's going and contact the teachers to get work and those sorts of things. So bringing that data to them, and it's saving their time. Is it providing them some benefit? Is it something that's going to improve their teaching? And getting that teacher buy-in is absolutely key. Second part of the puzzle is good quality data, and that's a real challenge. Collecting consistent quality data and the data that we need is always going to be a big challenge as to how you create those streamlined systems and consistent systems for collecting of the data. And then the last piece is always got to be leadership. And the leadership has to be 100% behind it, and they need to carve out the time for the staff. Down to, here is an hour and a half, this meeting time, sit down, here is something we'd like you to have a look at and do. Again, if you have that benefit, if you have that quality data, that'll be useful time, and the staff will start integrating it into what they're doing.
Amazing. I might just clarify, Ben talked about a pulse alert. So as part of the IntelliSchool, no, that's okay. As part of the IntelliSchool platform, there's the ability to trigger an alert to staff based on some thresholds so that staff can be informed that, say, a pastoral record has been made for a student, 3 times in the last week or something like that, and alert them to that so that they can go and sort of follow up on it according to school practice. You've talked a bit about data hygiene. Dan, I might throw to you here. Obviously you've done a lot of work as pastoral leader and as an education consultant. You've worked with schools integrating our product with analytics. So I think, what do those analytics bring to the day-to-day life of a modern educator? But also, what are you seeing when working with customers, getting them set up and ready for it to bring that value?
Thanks, Anth. I have to, for full transparency, say I've always had a love-hate relationship with data and analytics. As a teacher in the senior end for a lot of my career, a lot of it has been around rankings, and it has been about a lot of pressure to meet expectations. And a lot of us as teachers, and I was a teacher for 20 years, come with a sense of trepidation of how is this data going to be used? And that's a major concern. Working on the flip side and looking at all the wonderful advantages that it can also give, broadening it from looking at student achievement to looking at things like pastoral care and and alerts, to make those things actionable for staff to be able to go and take this piece of data and say, I can do something tangible with it to benefit a student, is a really powerful thing. In terms of working with schools, it's been incredibly valuable to see how data-informed practice can make their day-to-day easier at the same time as more effective. If it's used well, both of those things are very difficult, we know, in schools. Things that are worth doing are quite often quite challenging and very time-consuming. If you use data efficiently and effectively, sometimes you can have the benefit of doing both, of enriching a student's experience at school, making things that could turn into very large problems into catching them early and hopefully dealing with that issue before it becomes habitual. All of those things in the wellbeing space are important. I think there are 2 mega trends that through my teaching career have been really central, and one is the focus on wellbeing. My wife is somewhat partial. My wife is a head of wellbeing at a large Melbourne school, and so that the rise of us understanding the whole student picture and its power and impact on academic performance, on attendance, is just incredibly powerful. And the other one is data-informed practice, and I can see in the ways that data is being used, where the 2 dovetail beautifully and the 2 can support each other, rather than provide stress and pressure and rankings and feeling inadequate, it can uplift and help and support students as well.
Yeah, incredible. Trinity, you and I have talked a little bit about this, and I wrote this question specifically because I was so interested when you and I talked about it, but I'm wondering if you could give us a bit of insight into the work that you've been doing to weave analytics into your sort of staff inquiry cycle that they partake in for their professional development. That'd be great.
Sure. So I absolutely hear what you're saying about the sort of the bad uses of data, and I think anyone who's worked in a school where there is pressure to perform on the HSC results in New South Wales or whatever really feels that. As a deliberate counterpoint to that, we've been, I guess, one of the key things I think about data is you have to have a rationale for why you're using it, and you have to be able to tell that story to students and parents and teachers about why we're doing this thing. So we've been doing a project with the Association of Independent Schools in New South Wales. They run a service called the Effective Schools Service, sorry. And what it's really allowed us to do is to align our strategic planning to our use of data, and looking at that in a really holistic way, so that, for example, there's an alignment between teacher professional learning and the strategic initiatives and the kind of data plan and application of all of that. So as part of trying to make sure that we achieve our strategic goals, which do centre around an assessment initiative and the kind of improvement of teaching and learning more broadly, we've taken a research lens to our professional learning communities, and so they've sort of been the place where teachers are engaging with the data dashboards as a way of doing a kind of a disciplined sort of action research approach to their teaching in their classrooms. So the idea is that they're working with the data from their classroom, they're asking questions about that, they're going through a process of interrogating that, and they're generating the insights. Because I think so often in education, we are the recipients of research that has been done to us, and so we're really trying to help our teachers understand that actually the research that they generate in their kind of site-based, highly contextual approaches is just as valid and just as important, and actually something like IntelliSchools or whatever analytics it is that you have that's the place where they can triangulate data. They can run those research initiatives in their own classrooms, and they're just researching their professional practice. So it's not an add-on because they turn up to class and they implement things and they make decisions every day. It's just about providing them space. So exactly as you said, you've got your meeting times, repurposing that so that time is the time where you interrogate the data and you work with it together and you generate shared insights that you can then kind of share with others. So if you're kind of, I guess if you're aligning your strategic planning with your rationale for what you're doing with data, and then you're providing the resourcing around that, which is coming out of structures that already exist in the school, then you're much more likely to get that sort of buy-in and see, and help teachers see the value of the data because they're using it to inform their practice and their decisions on an ongoing basis. I'm not going to say it's totally straightforward, but I think that strategic alignment and making sure that you have all of leadership kind of buying into that because it's codified in your strategic plan is a really great enabler of a kind of a consistent and rigorous approach.
Yeah, I think, I think the idea of weaving it into the day-to-day, like you said, things that already exist, inquiry cycles for professional development are not a new concept within our profession, and to have that enhanced, rather than added on to, I think it's a really great way to blend it into the day-to-day.
And probably one thing else I would say there too is we've worked really hard on what data is, like the definition of that, and I would really, if you're, and I'm sure many of you are all across this, and this is very much part of your practice, but if you allow data to just be defined as something that is quantitative, that sits in a mark book, that is a metric, I think you're probably doing yourselves and your schools a disservice. I think one of the things that, Schoolbox with IntelliSchool offer is the fact that you can triangulate qualitative and quantitative data. You've got student voice, you can potentially collect perception data, you can create a really rich data culture, you can define the data that teachers work with as the work samples that they bring, for moderation and discussion in a meeting. So, yes, you use the data dashboards, but you apply them to the day-to-day work of the teacher, and you tell them that that's data triangulation and that's, research-informed professional practice.
Amazing. I think, all three of you have kind of talked a little bit about this, this approach of, tackling issues, like you said, Dan, before they become big, getting to them early. So Ben, I'm wondering, we often talk about the ideas of maybe proactive intervention versus reactive intervention. And with the sort of, the modernization of analytics, it's much more possible to be more proactive than reactive. So do you think there's a particular part of a student's life at school that is most impacted by the arming of that ability to be proactive?
Yeah, I think for context, I spent a lot of my early days working with data, working with VCE data and summative data, and it always felt very much like it was shutting the gate after the horse had bolted. And also that our whole idea of academic data and exam data and summative data being the only data that was really important. I think my focus at the moment is much more on that proactive data and pattern recognition. Essentially, looking at things like pastoral flags or pastoral patterns to look at whether or not a student is struggling or a student there's issues on the horizon, and then triangulating that information again. The other one I'm looking at is sort of, I've always nicknamed them cruisers. I'm not quite sure that's really the right name for it, but there's those students who are, there's two main groups of them as far as I can see. You've got the bright and the lazy.
I know where this is going now.
The kid who can get by just sitting in the class, not doing really much work, and they can still do okay in the test. They still get their A's and their B's, and we don't actually realise that they've got no study patterns until about year 11. When I've got them in my VCE class, and
I think every educator in the room knows, has just pictured that particular student in their room.
And I think that the other one is the ones that just slip under the radar full stop. Those awful moments in like week 6 when you have a parent-teacher interview and the parent walks in and you realise you have no idea who that child is, even though they've been sitting in your classroom, because they've learned so well to just become invisible in your classroom, however much maybe I'm admitting too much, but I think this is where this triangularization, this is where the partial data, this is where this qualitative data becomes incredibly powerful, and using some of the machine learning data analytics to look at to improve predictive scores, which IntelliSchool still aren't doing, but we'll have that as another conversation. But I think having some idea of predictive scores, I think really needs to become part of our work. But also, just flagging those kids who we can intervene where there's still something we can do about it before it's too late, and looking at those patterns and seeing those patterns of behaviour in order to be able to, as I said, timely intervention instead of. Yeah.
Thank you. Dan, we're going to come back to you. We've talked a lot about the benefits and the what we can get out of analytics and how we can weave it into our practice. But I think someone said it like this is none of this really matters unless the data is good, unless the data actually delivers what we need it to. So, obviously a lot of our schools are pulling data, like we talked about, out of our platform, and we've worked with schools on things like our data optimization bundles, things like that to help them with their Schoolbox data. What are some of the keys within our system, do you think? Some of the settings, some of the aspects of what we do that are really important to sort of nail down in order to make sure the analytics flow through correctly?
Absolutely. So before we dive into that specific part of the question, we've mentioned a number of external platforms, but I wonder if you have had a chance to explore the internal built-in analytics within Schoolbox. I love some of those things, even though probably they're not very comprehensive. But just the idea of student behaviour, even pages, you can have a look at a particular class, have a look at the analytics of that particular class, and see how many logins a particular student has had as compared to their levels of achievement. And it's really wonderful to see, students who work incredibly hard, who log in, who follow instructions, who read the things that you post, and who are engaged in those pages, often have this very strong correlation with how well they do. And that's very powerful. You can gain quite a bit just from these internal analytics as well. Coming back to your question, just in terms of the nitty-gritty, the construction of the entire system is one thing. That's one part of it. The other, in terms of data hygiene and data capture, that probably is equally, if not more important, is just really great practices when it comes to things like, let's talk LMS, because that's often where it gets most complex. But the processes by which your assessment is standardised and by which it's sound has an immediate impact, and the byproduct of those results being valid and those results giving you insights that actually are meaningful. So it's core assessment practices within your school applied in a digital form are absolutely fundamental, and the schools that gain the most benefit from looking at their analytics are those where they can trust them. They can think, yes, absolutely, all of that work that the students have done going back 5, 6, 7 semesters is all sound data, and we can draw insights from that. Those that have had inconsistent practices obviously then will question that data, and does that data really represent the reality of what's happening in terms of trends, not just for a student but in terms of an entire cohort. So I think the first part of it is making sure that you have those systems. Within Schoolbox, obviously, categorisation is really important. You can only split data and slice data if you have the ability to differentiate between one type of assessment and another type of assessment. One that you do report on summatively, that you do take seriously in terms of a parent engagement, and other data perhaps that maybe you don't, but maybe could give you really important information. So it is quite a powerful tool. There's lots of granularity, particularly when you start diving into data tables, joining data tables, and finding bits of information that you really require. The other thing I'll just quickly mention is obviously growth mindset is really important, rather than just focusing on scores and outcomes. And I love how in Schoolbox rubrics, which people complain about because it does require a level of standardisation, allow you to gain insights on key knowledge and skills and track them longitudinally, rather than just saying, here's your result, it's a B+, you did really well, but there's room for improvement. You can track very specific rubric capabilities and indicators over a number of different assessments and see trends of a student's performance or regression within that. So explore analytics within the platform itself. There's actually quite a bit there to start off with before you get to integrations.
Ben, Trinity, I don't know if you want to add to this, but you've obviously integrating Schoolbox data with your analytics software. Is there any parts of, I guess, what you do from a Schoolbox perspective that you think are quite important to making those a success? If you don't have anything off the top of your head, we can move to the next question, but I thought I might just give you an opportunity if there's anything you wanted to add.
It's nothing earth-shattering, and to be honest, I think we need to do more with rubrics than we're currently doing. But I suppose I would just say there are key points in the year, like, for example, at the beginning of the year when you're doing handovers and things like that. And I think there is a real value in at those key moments, whether it's a handover conversation or whether it's at the end of a semester, when you've kind of got aggregated information, I think there is a real value in allocating time for teachers and teams to go in and look at some of that, because I absolutely agree with you. I think, one of the things that we focused on a lot, which is both using the sort of box and whisker plots that are inside Schoolbox and also using the box and violin plots in IntelliSchool is, they're really great tools for just visualising sort of distributions of results for students. And so the conversation that you can have that's really rich there around assessment moderation and, absolutely validating those teacher professional judgments or making visible to middle leaders their role in really helping their teams understand that is really powerful.
I suppose the other thing I would add to that, I think I wholeheartedly agree. The closer that the data entry point is to the data and the analytical point, the better. And it also, the double benefit of that is the feedback loop, that teachers see the benefit of putting in the consistent data because they're getting useful information out of it. And then you're not then having to enforce or chase up people who aren't inputting their data correctly, if they're already getting that immediate feedback loop. So yeah, absolutely.
I was just going to say, and I guess I'm thinking about what you're saying and thinking a necessary precondition is obviously just a basic level of data literacy amongst the teachers. So, for example, we had to spend a lot of time focusing, say, in the academic space on the difference between ability and performance data, so that people could actually read dashboards and kind of understand what they were seeing and what were the valid judgments that they could make from some of those visualisations. Because I think the danger with a data dashboard is it looks beautiful and it's this great picture, but actually teachers need a little bit of skill and training, or you need to build protocols into how do they interrogate that data so they actually understand what's being visualised there.
I'm thinking of the cohort analytics dashboard within IntelliSchools and that Sankey chart, which is my favourite chart name, by the way. I'm thinking of those kinds of charts where you need to understand what you're looking at. Yeah, absolutely. Trinity, I'm going to pass back to you, and we've talked about this in general, but I think, staff adoption, like we've talked about, and staff embracing analytics is just so important. So, where are your staff now with that embracing? Where does that sit now? What are those key successes, those things that you look at with where they are now that you think really point to the work that you've done as an individual, as a team? But what are some of those, challenges that maybe you've faced or are still facing in that space?
Yeah, I think it's definitely an ongoing project, and like anything in schools, we're just so busy that the minute it's not the area of focus, it kind of melts away. So I'm not going to say that I've got a magic bullet here, but I absolutely, as we said earlier, I just remember that moment of, being so enthralled by these dashboards and just heartbroken that nobody else loved them. But actually, what's come since from there is just I think the importance of different data for different audiences. So, for example, when we're evaluating our progress against our whole school strategic plan and those kinds of metrics, right, that's a really different data conversation to what middle leaders do to really understand the impact and the sort of leadership decisions that they need to make, whether it's in the pastoral or the academic space. And then, really focusing teachers on actually their own class data and making sure it's kind of filtered and digestible for them in that form, because really, what's the point of engaging with data if you don't have any influence over it? It can just be kind of frustrating. You can feel disempowered. If you've got a really great narrative about we're all on this school improvement journey and here are the metrics and here's the progress that we've made, and you're celebrating those quick wins and those successes, then sure, the whole school level data is great. But actually the teachers are going to see the incremental improvements, in their classroom with their students. And so really helping them be alert to, what are the early signs of impact going to be. Or, how they're maybe, aligning formative and summative assessment, let's say, so that, they can visualise student growth or whatever it is really important. And probably the other thing is just a mistake that I made early on and that I've really come to think differently about is the fact that just launching to whole staff is actually probably not that powerful. There's a real value in getting your middle leaders on board early and getting them trained and confident and comfortable so that because they are your kind of preferred senders for any kind of school initiative. They are the ones that are translating for their teams why we're doing this thing and how it's going to be of benefit in Year 10 science or in Year 3 English or whatever it is. So I think really spending the time to invest and develop them is a way that you can get much, much more traction rather than going straight to teachers who, yes, you need to provide time because they're very busy, but actually they will probably value that time more when that's actually being led by their middle leader.
Amazing. Before we throw maybe to a few questions from the floor, I'm sure there are a few, let's go. We've talked a lot about, where you've come from to where you are now. I guess if we're, putting our prediction hats on, what do you think is the future of impact for data analytics? What do you think, in the near term, the long term, what's going to be that next thing within a student's life or within the school life that's going to be impacted quite heavily by data analytics? Maybe we'll start down the far end. If Dan's got an answer, he's more than welcome to provide that. So we'll start with Dan and we'll make our way back down.
Oh, thanks. Well, I think it was a statistic. I don't wonder, Anthony, if you remember the precise number. There was an enormous. James did a bit of a presentation for us. Was it yesterday? And there was an enormous quantity of pastoral care data that we could quantify from a, you know, the data.
It was a big number that made everyone go, whoa.
But I think that what I'm most excited about is that we live in a world that's just full of data, and there's oceans of it, and we have all the data that we ever need, really up to date at our fingertips. But this, with any increase of the amount of data comes a limit in how we can absorb it and make sense of it. So what's most powerful that I think, and what AI, is helping us do, is this ocean of information that we have. How do we gain meaningful insights from it? How do we take this huge number of trends all happening concurrently and make something actionable out of it? And I think that's the power that I see that technology will have, in the way that, for example, we talked about IntelliSchool, the way that it can calculate out of your NAPLAN data zones of proximal development. It will say, at this point in time, the student has gone from confidently answering questions to now inconsistently answering questions. This is the zone in which you need to challenge them to go to that next step. And that's a powerful thing for a teacher, because for me to identify that in a student's journey based on NAPLAN data, if you've ever looked at NAPLAN data, is near impossible. I mean, I can't do those calculations and say, for Jane over here, I need to concentrate on this specific skill. And analytics is able to pinpoint that very specific skill in that particular data set and say, in terms of spelling, in terms of grammar, this is what they need to concentrate on. And to me, that's powerful, because I can do something about it as a teacher. I can't, looking at a result and saying, you scored in this particular, particular stay 9, it gives me really not much to work with, apart from a label and says, well, you're in that stay 9. So I think that's pretty powerful.
Amazing. Thanks. Trinity?
I'm contemplating. That was a very sensible, lovely answer, but, is this the forum for me to say all of the things that I want that I don't yet have? But I think I agree that predictive analytics is obviously something that we're all really interested in. I think, one of the real... one of the things that research suggests has an enormously significant impact on student learning is the expectations of the teachers. And I think making sure that we have high expectations of all students so that they rise to meet those are really important. And I see a real role for predictive analytics in being able to surface those students who perhaps are coasting a little bit and have more in the tank that we're not going to see, and have done a great job of lowering our expectations of what we can think of them. Look, I think also, if I'm just speaking personally about my own context, we've probably focused more on the teaching and learning side of things, and there's a big role for analytics in streamlining some of our, like curriculum compliance processes, and there's lots of room for automating some of those auditing things that we don't love, so that we can spend more time just in the relational work with staff and students and parents that, we love.
The things that bring us joy versus
Exactly.
the things that bring us fear. Ben?
Well, I think I've kind of answered that question a little bit. I'm not going to continue talking about predictives and predicted scores, but I think AI is obviously the hot topic at the moment, and I'm a firm believer that it poses the greatest existential threat to education that I've ever seen, but it also presents some of the best opportunities. Machine learning for data analytics, language models for the possibility of differentiated education for students, and chatbots that can bring things down to the level that the students are at, but also. There's so much talk about AI at the moment, talking about it taking away all the fun stuff from us. It now does all the art, and it does this, and it does the creative writing. Robots were supposed to do all the boring things, and it's doing all the fun stuff. And I think we need to look at how we can use AI to do some of the most boring things. So how we can, I love doing an item analysis. That really shows how twisted I am. But I love doing an item analysis and sitting there and putting in all the data for all my assessments and looking at the patterns of how the students have performed. But it's a lot of work, and you have to love Excel to do that. And it's been hard for me to come to terms with. People don't all love Excel. Really weird. But the point is, I think AI has the potential to be able to do that sort of stuff for us, to be able to do some of that legwork. And that's where I think it could be really powerful, and saving teachers time from doing those boring things and providing them with actionable data. But not just actionable data that is in the form that they're ready for. Because one thing I haven't talked about, which has been a big moment for me in the last couple of years, is the realization that, I don't know if anyone's been looking into this, there's a lot of work being done related to educational trauma. So where adults talk about situations in their childhood where something horrible happened when they're schooling, and it completely affected their whole view on things. So a lot of work's been done around creativity. People decide themselves as not being creative because they had a horrible experience with an art teacher when they were at school. A lot of our teachers have had those traumas relating to statistics and mathematics. You know, any of you who are mathematics teachers, how many parents have you had who've said, "Oh, I don't get maths"? Like, I'm acutely dyslexic. But I still have very few people sitting down and saying, "I don't read too well," you know. But people are very open about, you know, the trauma they've had associated with mathematics. And we've got teachers in our schools who literally, you know, are traumatized by mathematics. And so for us to then give them these complex things to look at and get them to ask them to unpack it, we are asking something utterly unreasonable of them. And we need to bring it down to their level, and we need to bring it down to where it's accessible, and it needs to be done in a way that everybody can do that. And we need to meet those teachers where they are and not just expect them all to be massive data nerds like us. So, yeah.
It would be, I thank you for that. I think, I've been guilty of it. I'm a drama teacher, and I'm actually pretty good with, maths in my head, like, getting some quick addition and multiplication done. But I'm always the first to go, I'm a drama teacher, not a maths teacher, So I think it's, something that we've all got to reflect on and meet people where they are. I do think we're probably going to have run out of time for some questions from the floor. So what I'm going to suggest, without overwhelming these two throughout the rest of the meetup, if you do have questions, I'm sure, Ben and Trinity are very open with, the things that they've talked about today. Please feel free to ask them questions. We will be on the strategy studio throughout Meetup at break times. Like I said, there'll be a consultant or a school engagement manager at that stand at every break time. If you want to talk to us about what Schoolbox can do from an analytics point of view, if there's data that you want to get optimized within the platform, we've got some things that can help with that. But what I would love us to do right now is give our three panelists a massive round of applause for their contributions. And if they wait just there. Got a little something for each of them. So thank you, Ben. Thank you, Trinity.
Thank you.
I'm getting a bonus, by the way, that's why.
Don't worry, he's getting a firm high five. Thank you so much, everyone. I hope that this session has, provided some insight into how analytics are going inside these two wonderful schools. I know that everyone is at a different stage of their journey. So, there's 10 minutes now, between now and the next session. If you want to start making your way outside, get a refreshment, make your way to your next room, that's fine. But also, there's other people at your table from other schools. If you want to sit down and have a quick conversation with one another, I'd encourage that as well. But otherwise, thank you so much for coming to our panel session. Thank you again to our panelists, and we will see you all again very soon. Thank you very much.